Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. The footprints ended mid-stride. Not at a cliff edge, not at a stream, not at any logical boundary. Just stopped, as if Madison Garcia had been plucked from the earth between one step and the next. Thomas O'Brien knelt beside the final imprint, his breath fogging in air that shouldn't have been this cold in August. He'd been a ranger for 6 weeks. 6 weeks in North Cascades National Park, transferred from the flat, predictable forests of Michigan's Lower Peninsula to this vertical wilderness of glaciers and granite. 6 weeks of learning trail names he couldn't pronounce, memorizing elevation markers that made his ears pop, and trying to ignore the way the other rangers went quiet when he mentioned Sector 7, the sector where Madison Garcia had vanished 4 days ago. Thomas pressed his fingertips into the soil beside the print. The earth was frozen solid. He checked his thermometer. 58 degrees Fahrenheit. The ground shouldn't freeze at 58 degrees. It couldn't. But when he scraped at the dirt with his knife, ice crystals glittered beneath the surface layer, spreading outward from the footprint like an infection. His radio crackled. He'd turned the volume down after the third time dispatch had checked in, but he ignored it. The Garmin GPS unit clipped to his vest read 5,847 feet, putting him half a mile past the last confirmed sighting of Madison on the Cascade Pass Trail. Search and rescue had covered this ground twice already. They'd found the same thing he had. Nothing. Madison Garcia, 28 years old, experienced backcountry hiker, had simply ceased to exist at this exact spot. Except the ground remembered her. The earth remembered, even if it shouldn't. Thomas stood, his knees protesting. The forest pressed close here, old-growth hemlocks creating a cathedral of shadow despite the afternoon sun. He'd grown up in woods, had spent his childhood navigating the mixed hardwoods of the Midwest. But these trees felt different, ancient, watchful. The silence was wrong. No bird calls, no rustle of small mammals, not even the buzz of insects. Just the whisper of wind through needles and his own breathing, too loud in the stillness. His supervisor, Rita Chen, had briefed him with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this too many times. Madison Garcia, solo hiker, filed her itinerary. 3 days on Cascade Pass Trail, summit attempt on Sahali Peak if weather held. Didn't check in at the ranger station on day 4. Her car's still at the trailhead. No activity on her credit cards, no cell phone pings. She knew these mountains, O'Brien. Grew up in Marble Mount, spent every summer up here since she was 12. Any history of mental health issues? Thomas had asked, thinking of his training modules on missing persons. Substance abuse? Relationship problems? Rita had given him a look that suggested he was asking the wrong questions. Madison was solid. Geology PhD student, worked seasonal SAR for 3 years. She's the one who finds people, not the one who gets lost. But everyone gets lost eventually, Thomas thought now, studying the impossible frost pattern. Some just get found again. He pulled out his field notebook, a habit his academy instructor had drilled into him despite the digital alternatives, and sketched the footprint configuration. Madison's boot print pointed north-northwest, toward the ridgeline. Her stride length suggested she'd been moving at a normal pace, not running, not stumbling, just walking and then nothing. He documented the ice formation, the precise GPS coordinates, the ambient temperature, everything that didn't make sense. When he looked up from his notes, the light had changed. The sun, which should have been high in the western sky, seemed filtered through a haze he couldn't see, turning everything pale and flat. The shadows under the hemlocks had deepened to absolute black, as if the darkness there was somehow thicker than normal shadow should be. Thomas checked his watch. 2:47 p.m. Plenty of daylight left, but his skin prickled with the instinctive awareness that he should leave, should get back to the trail junction before dark. Which was irrational. He'd camped alone in the backcountry dozens of times, and darkness was darkness, nothing more threatening than the absence of light. He forced himself to move forward, following the trajectory Madison's print suggested, The frozen ground transitioned back to normal soil after 3 feet, as if whatever had caused the temperature drop had been localized, specific, targeting her. Thomas caught himself. That was the kind of thinking that didn't belong in a case file. Facts only. Observations. Not speculation about targeting and intention. The terrain rose sharply, transitioning from forest to alpine meadow. Normally this area would be carpeted with summer wildflowers, lupine, paintbrush, heather, but the vegetation here looked stunted, twisted. He knelt to examine a cluster of what should have been thriving fireweed and found the stems blackened, brittle, as if frost killed in the middle of growing season. His radio crackled again, Rita's voice breaking through static. "O'Brien, status check." He thumbed the transmit button. "I'm at Garcia's last confirmed position. Found some anomalies. Requesting permission to extend search radius." A pause, longer than normal radio protocol. Then, "Define anomalies." Thomas looked at the frozen earth, the dead plants, the unnatural silence. Temperature irregularities. Vegetation die-off inconsistent with season. Possible environmental contamination. Another pause. "O'Brien, I need you to be very specific. What exactly are you seeing?" Something in her tone made him choose his words carefully. "The ground is frozen around Garcia's last footprint. Localized, maybe 3-foot radius. Outside that radius, everything's normal. I've never seen anything like it." The static on the radio seemed to deepen, as if the mountains themselves were listening. Then Rita's voice came through, flatter than before. "Document everything. Photographs, measurements, samples if you can get them. But O'Brien, don't go past the timber line. Stay in the trees." "Why?" "Because Madison didn't." The radio clicked off before he could respond. Thomas stared at the handset, then at the alpine meadow stretching up toward the ridge. The tree line was a hard boundary here, hemlocks giving way abruptly to open ground. Beyond that, he could see the rocky slopes leading up to Sahale Peak's glacier-clad summit, white against the blue sky. Beautiful, desolate, and according to Rita, where he shouldn't go, he went anyway. The moment he stepped out of the tree cover, the temperature dropped 15 degrees. His breath went from barely visible to thick fog, and the skin on his face tightened with cold. The Garmin's temperature sensor confirmed it, 43 degrees, a full 20-degree drop in 10 feet of horizontal distance. Impossible, unless there was some bizarre microclimate effect he didn't understand. The meadow should have been alive with the drone of insects, the whisper of grass and wind. Instead, it was silent as a grave. Thomas walked carefully, scanning the ground for any sign of Madison's passage. His boots crunched on vegetation that felt wrong underfoot. Too brittle, too fragile. He found her backpack at 6,100 feet. It sat upright in the middle of a small clearing, positioned as if carefully placed rather than dropped. The red fabric stood out against the pale grass like a wound. Thomas approached slowly, documented its position with his camera, then pulled on nitrile gloves before touching it. The pack was heavy. Madison hadn't lightened her load. He opened the main compartment and found everything intact. Tent, sleeping bag, food rations still sealed, water filtration system, first aid kit. Her wilderness permit was in the front pocket, properly filled out, dated 4 days ago. Her journal was in there too, a green moleskin with water-stained pages. Thomas flipped through it, skimming entries about trail conditions and weather patterns. Madison wrote in precise scientific prose, documenting observations about alpine ecology and geology. But the final entries changed in tone. August 14th. Strange cold front moved through last night. Thermometer read 29 degrees at 5,800 feet. Unusual for mid-August. Checked weather service. No reported temperature drop. Localized phenomenon? August 15th. The cold is following me. I know how that sounds. But twice today I've felt it. Sharp temperature drop, maybe 20 degrees, lasting 5 to 10 minutes. No meteorological explanation. Air pressure stable. No wind. Just cold. August 16th. Found tracks this morning circling my tent. Human feet bare. Who hikes barefoot at 6,000 feet? Followed them for a quarter mile. They just stop. No sign of where the person went. Stride length increases toward the end. Whoever left them was running, or something was chasing them. August 17th. I'm not alone up here. I can feel it watching. Last night I heard something outside my tent. Breathing, but wrong. Too deep, too slow. Like lungs the size of oil drums. I stayed inside until dawn. When I came out, there were handprints in the frost on my tent. Hands too large to be human. 6-fingered. The journal ended there, mid-entry, as if Madison had stopped writing mid-thought. Thomas's hands had gone numb despite the gloves. He looked around the clearing, suddenly aware of how exposed he was. The tree line was 100 yards back. The summit loomed above, glaciers gleaming like teeth. And he was alone in the thin air with a missing woman's pack and a journal describing something impossible. His radio hissed with static, but when he tried to raise dispatch, he got nothing but white noise. The Garmin still showed satellite lock, but the display flickered intermittently, as if something was interfering with the GPS signal. A sound reached him, faint but distinct. Footsteps. Slow, measured, crunching through the brittle vegetation. Thomas turned in a circle, trying to locate the source, but the acoustics of the meadow made it impossible. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the rocks above. Then he saw it. A figure, perhaps 200 yards away, moving along the ridge. Human-shaped, but wrong in ways he couldn't immediately define. Too tall, or too thin, or both. It walked with a strange, hitching gait, as if its legs bent at angles that didn't match human anatomy. Thomas raised his binoculars with shaking hands. The figure was closer than it should have been. He could have sworn it was 200 yards away a second ago, but through the lenses it appeared to be maybe 100 yards, approaching steadily. He could see details now. Pale, bark-like skin stretched tight over an elongated frame. Arms that hung too low, reaching almost to the ground. And the face? He dropped the binoculars. When he looked again with naked eyes, the figure was gone. But the footsteps continued, louder now, closer. Thomas grabbed Madison's pack and ran. He made it to the tree line in 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes, his lungs burning in the thin air, his heart hammering against his ribs. The moment he crossed under the hemlock's shelter, the temperature rose and the footsteps stopped. He leaned against a tree trunk, gasping, trying to process what he'd seen. Nothing. He'd seen nothing. A trick of elevation and light, maybe a mountain goat or a bear at extreme distance, distorted by heat shimmer or... The temperature was 43 degrees. There was no heat shimmer. Thomas forced himself to calm down, to think like a ranger instead of a terrified animal. Whatever he'd seen, or thought he'd seen, didn't change the facts. Madison was missing. Her pack had been found at a specific location. The journal entries suggested she'd been experiencing something unusual before she disappeared. Experiencing or imagining? He pulled out the journal again, reading more carefully. Madison's handwriting deteriorated over the final entries, becoming jagged and rushed. But her observations remained specific, detailed. The 6-fingered handprints. The sound of oversized lungs. The sensation of being watched. His academy training had covered search and rescue protocol for disoriented or hypothermic subjects. It had covered protocols for accident scenes and crime scenes. It had not covered what to do when a missing person's journal described something from a nightmare. The sun was lower now, touching the western peaks. Thomas checked his watch, 4:15 p.m. He'd lost 90 minutes somehow, though he could have sworn he'd only been in the meadow for 20 minutes at most. Time distortion was a symptom of altitude sickness, but he felt fine. No headache, no nausea, no confusion, except for the lost time, and the impossible cold, and the figure on the ridge that had moved like no living thing should move. He keyed his radio again. Static answered, but underneath it he thought he heard something else. A voice, perhaps, speaking in a language he didn't recognize. Guttural, clicking, utterly inhuman. The radio went dead in his hand. Thomas looked at the darkening forest, then at Madison's pack. Inside he'd found her satellite phone. Unlike his radio, it still had battery and signal, 3 bars, incredible at this elevation. But when he checked her call history, the last entry was from 5 days ago before she'd entered the backcountry. He started to dial dispatch, then stopped. Rita's warning echoed in his mind. Don't go past the timberline. She'd known something about this place, about what happened here. Instead, he opened the phone's photo gallery. Madison had been documenting her trip. Trail vistas, wildflowers, geological formations. But the photos from the final day showed something else. In the background of a sunset shot, barely visible at the edge of the frame, was a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, watching from the trees. Thomas zoomed in. The image pixelated, but he could make out details. Elongated limbs, pale skin, and eyes that reflected the camera flash like an animal's, shining white in the gathering darkness. In the next photo, taken minutes later judging by the metadata, the figure was closer. Then closer still. The final photo in the sequence was a blur of motion and darkness, but at the center, crystal clear, was a face. It was human and not human, emaciated to the point of skeletal, with skin stretched so tight the bones showed through like topography. The mouth was open in a rictus that revealed too many teeth, sharp and irregular. But the eyes were the worst. Human eyes, intelligent and aware and hungry, with a hunger that went beyond mere appetite. Thomas dropped the phone. When he picked it up again with shaking hands, the screen showed a new photo. Taken 30 seconds ago, according to the timestamp. He hadn't touched the camera function, but there it was. A picture of him taken from behind, showing him standing in the clearing examining Madison's pack, showing him from a vantage point maybe 20 feet away. He spun around, nothing but trees and shadows and the failing light. The phone buzzed, a text message from Madison's number to her own phone sent right now. It's so hungry, Thomas. It's been hungry for so long. He was running before he consciously decided to move. Madison's pack bouncing against his back, branches whipping at his face. The trail seemed impossibly far away, and the forest had become a maze of identical hemlocks, each massive trunk indistinguishable from the next. His Garmin showed him heading south toward the trail junction, but the path kept shifting, forcing him to detour around deadfalls and thick underbrush that hadn't been there on the way up. Something was hurting him, directing his flight. Thomas burst out of the trees into a clearing he didn't recognize. The light was almost gone now, the sun having dropped behind the peaks, leaving only a gray twilight that made everything flat and distant. In the center of the clearing stood a structure, rough logs lashed together with what might have been rope or might have been something else, something organic. Hanging from the crossbeam were objects that swayed in a wind he couldn't feel. He approached despite every instinct screaming at him to run. The objects were pieces of clothing, tattered and weathered. A blue jacket, a red bandana, a yellow rain shell. Each item tagged with a name written in black marker on white tape. David Chen, 2009. Sarah Mitchell, 2012. Robert Harkins, 2015. 16 names in total. 16 people who had entered Sector 7 and never left. Madison's green fleece jacket hung at the end, no date yet recorded. A sound behind him, that hitching, uneven gait, footsteps on frozen ground. Thomas turned slowly, unable to help himself. It stood at the clearing's edge, where the twilight was deepest, tall enough that it had to stoop beneath the lowest branches. Skin like birch bark, peeling and pale. Limbs that ended in hands with too many fingers, tipped with black nails like obsidian. And the face, that terrible, starving face with its desperate human eyes. It spoke, and its voice was a chorus of whispers as if dozens of people were speaking in unison. I told you not to come here. I tried to warn you. I've been warning all of you for so long. Thomas couldn't speak, couldn't move. The cold rolled off the creature in waves, and his breath came out in clouds that froze and fell like snow. You don't understand hunger, it continued, taking a step forward. The ground blackened beneath its feet, vegetation withering instantly. Real hunger. Not the kind that stops when you eat, the kind that grows. the kind that becomes what you are instead of what you feel. Another step. Thomas's legs finally responded to his brain's screaming commands, and he stumbled backward. His hand found the canister of bear spray on his vest. Useless, probably, but it was something. Madison understood at the end. She gave herself willingly, said it was better than being torn apart, said she'd been hungry too, in her own way, hungry for something more than her safe little life in the safe little valley. Up here, she thought she'd find it. The creature, the Wendigo, because that's what it was, what it had always been, haunting these mountains since before the Park Service gave them names and boundaries, tilted its head at an angle that would have snapped a human neck. She did find it, just not the way she expected. Thomas raised the bear spray with both hands to keep them from shaking. "Where is she? What did you do?" The Wendigo's mouth stretched wider, revealing layers of teeth like a lamprey. "She's here. She's always here. They all are." It gestured with one elongated arm toward the forest behind Thomas. He risked a glance and saw them, figures standing between the trees. 17 of them, tall and thin and starving, with skin like bark and eyes that held echoes of who they used to be. One wore the tattered remains of a blue jacket. Another still had a red bandana knotted around what remained of its neck. And in the front, newest and therefore least transformed, stood something that had been Madison Garcia. She retained more human characteristics than the others. Her face was still recognizably a face, her hair still hung in dark tangles, but the change was there. Her limbs had elongated, her skin had paled, and when she opened her mouth, the teeth were already sharpening. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and her voice was her own, still human beneath the chorus of other voices. "I tried to leave, but it won't let us. The hunger won't let us. And now you're here, and you smell like everything we're not anymore. You smell like life." They moved as one, the 17 Wendigo surrounding the clearing in a tightening circle. Thomas sprayed the first one that got close. It recoiled, clawing at its face, but 2 more took its place. The cold was absolute now, his fingers going numb, his thoughts slowing. He felt teeth sink into his shoulder, felt the unnatural cold of those jaws spreading through his body like poison. The pain was enormous, overwhelming, and then it wasn't pain anymore. It was hunger. Sudden, terrible, all-consuming hunger that made his stomach cramp and his mouth flood with saliva. Thomas fell to his knees, and the Wendigo that had bitten him, that had been David Chen once according to the tag on the moldering jacket, leaned close and whispered, "Don't fight it. The hunger only hurts if you fight it." But Thomas did fight. He pulled the knife from his belt and drove it into the creature's torso. The blade went in easily, too easily, as if the Wendigo's body was made of hollow wood. The creature didn't bleed. It just stepped back, looked at the knife handle protruding from its chest, and laughed with a sound like wind through dead branches. "You can't kill us," Madison said, and her voice was sadder now, more distant. "We're already dead. We died the moment we gave in, the moment we let the hunger in." The circle closed. Thomas swung the bear spray wildly, kicked at grasping hands, but there were too many. They pulled him down into the frozen dirt, and he felt more teeth, more cold, more of that terrible hunger spreading through his veins. And then, suddenly, they released him. Thomas lay gasping, waiting for the killing blow. But the Wendigo had drawn back, forming a wider circle. They swayed in place as if listening to something he couldn't hear. The first Wendigo, the one that had spoken to him, stepped forward again. "She's coming," it said. "The first. The one who made us. The one who's been feeding in these mountains for 300 years. From the darkest part of the forest came a sound, antlers scraping against trees, hooves on frozen ground, and breathing, deep and slow, like Madison had described in her journal. The thing that emerged was older than the others, larger, less human. Its body was a twisted amalgamation of human and animal characteristics, deer antlers sprouting from a skull that was stretched and elongated, a body that might have once walked upright but now moved on 4 limbs, each ending in hands with too many fingers. Its eyes glowed with a cold blue light, And when it opened its mouth, Thomas could see down its throat into a darkness that went deeper than any living thing's body should contain. This was the original, the first person to give in to the hunger so long ago that history had forgotten their name. This was the Wendigo that made all the others. It looked at Thomas with those ancient, hungry eyes. Then it spoke, and its voice was the wind and the cold and the empty spaces between stars. You cannot carry my story down from this mountain. You cannot warn them. The hunger is patient. It has been patient for longer than your people have named these peaks. It will be patient for longer still. The creature moved closer and Thomas could smell it. Death and decay and the sharp, clean scent of deep winter. But you, it continued, you I will not transform. You I will leave as you are, so you can understand what mercy looks like when the hungry give it. It leaned down, bringing its massive head level with Thomas's face. Go. Run. Tell them whatever you think they'll believe. But know this. Every word you speak of what happened here will sound like madness. Every piece of evidence you gathered will prove nothing. And when you lie awake at night, feeling the cold in your shoulder where my child bit you, you will know that we are here. We are always here. We are waiting. The circle of Wendigo parted, leaving a clear path back to the trail. Thomas didn't question it. He ran, crashed through the underbrush, followed the failing light of his dying GPS unit back toward civilization. Behind him, he heard them singing, if that terrible keening could be called singing, in a language that predated English, predated the Park Service, predated everything except hunger itself. He made it to the trailhead at dawn, though he had no memory of the last miles. His truck was where he'd left it, covered in dew that had frozen into intricate patterns. His radio lay on the passenger seat, shattered, though he didn't remember breaking it. Rita was waiting at the ranger station, her face carefully neutral. You look like hell, O'Brien. Thomas set Madison's pack on her desk, set the satellite phone beside it, still showing that final text message, set his field notebook with its careful documentation of impossible things. She's gone, he said. His voice sounded strange, distant, as if someone else was speaking through his mouth. They're all gone. 16 people, Rita. 16 people who came to Sector 7 and never left. Rita picked up the phone, scrolled through the photos without expression. Then she turned to her computer and opened a file. The screen showed a map of the park with red dots marking locations. 17 dots in Sector 7, clustered around Cascade Pass. 18, she corrected quietly. You forgot about the hiker in 2003, before I started here. Thomas stared at her. You knew. You knew what was up there. I know what the reports say. I know what people claim they've seen. I know that every few years someone experienced and prepared goes into that sector and doesn't come out. Rita closed the file. I also know that search and rescue never finds bodies, never finds evidence of animal attacks or rock falls or any of the usual backcountry dangers. People just vanish, O'Brien. And the Park Service can't close an entire sector based on vanishings. We have to warn people. Put up signs, close the trails. With what justification? That there's a hungry ghost in the mountains? That 18 people have been transformed into monsters from native legend? Rita's voice was sharp now, cutting. You write that in a report and you'll be out of a job by lunch. You talk about it publicly and you'll be a laughingstock. And the people will keep coming because that's what people do. They don't believe in monsters until they meet one. Thomas looked at his hands. The wound on his shoulder throbbed with cold that would never quite fade. So we do nothing? Just wait for the next one? We do what we've always done. We mark it as unsolved. We tell the families we searched but found nothing. We file the reports in the archive where no one will read them, and we try to sleep at night. Rita stood, walked to the window overlooking the mountains. I'm sorry you had to learn this way, but now you understand why the other rangers don't talk about Sector 7. Why we all drew straws to see who'd take the new guy on that search. Why I told you to stay in the trees. Madison, Thomas said. She's still up there. She's still aware. I know. Rita's reflection in the window showed her eyes were wet. Madison was my friend. We worked together for 3 summers. But the thing wearing her face now isn't her, O'Brien. Not really. The person she was died the moment she let the hunger in. Thomas left the station before noon. He wrote his report, carefully editing out everything that mattered, leaving only a dry recitation of facts. Last known position, recovered belongings, no sign of the missing person. Search suspended pending new evidence. It read like a dozen other reports he'd filed during training, except for the cold knot in his chest when he signed his name. He stayed on at North Cascades for 2 more weeks before requesting a transfer. Not because he was afraid, though he was, deeply and perpetually afraid, but because every morning when he looked at the mountains, he could see Sector 7 in the distance, could see the ridge where Madison had vanished, could imagine the 16, 18 figures standing in the trees, waiting with eternal patience for the next hiker who strayed too far, stayed too long, grew too hungry for something they couldn't name. The transfer came through in September. He left North Cascades on a gray morning with rain turning to sleet, and he didn't look back. But sometimes in the depths of winter, when the temperature drops without warning and the air takes on that sharp, clean scent of deep cold, Thomas wakes in the night with the taste of hunger in his mouth. Not physical hunger. He's learned to ignore that. This hunger is deeper, older, patient as stone. It reminds him that he was marked, that he was tasted and found wanting, or was it found worthy? And that somewhere in the mountains, the first Wendigo still waits and still remembers his name. 3 years later, Thomas reads about another disappearance in North Cascades. A solo hiker, experienced, well prepared. Last seen on the Cascade Pass Trail. No sign of struggle, no evidence of foul play. Just gone, as if the mountain had swallowed them whole. He closes the article and doesn't sleep that night, or the next, because he knows with terrible certainty that it's 19 now. 19 figures standing in the trees. 19 voices added to the chorus of hunger. And he knows, though he's tried for 3 years to convince himself otherwise, that one day the hunger will grow too strong. One day he'll return to Sector 7 not as a ranger, but as a pilgrim, walking past the tree line into the cold, following the sound of antlers scraping against wood and hooves on frozen ground. One day, he'll stop running and let the hunger finally, mercifully, consume him. But not today. Not yet. Today he just closes his eyes and listens to the wind and tries not to hear the voices of everyone who came before him, calling his name across the endless frozen distance. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The tent fabric was frozen solid, crystallized from the inside out. Impossible in November, incomprehensible in afternoon sun. Robert Fitzgerald had seen plenty of abandoned campsites in his 15 years with the National Park Service, but nothing like this. He crouched beside the collapsed dome tent, one gloved hand hovering above the nylon surface. The fabric crackled under his touch, brittle as ancient parchment. Frost patterns spiraled across the green material in fractals too perfect to be natural, each crystalline formation radiating from a central point inside the tent. The thermometer clipped to his pack read 47 degrees Fahrenheit. The sun hung at 2 o'clock, weak but present through the thin November clouds. Nothing about the weather explained what he was seeing. Dispatch, this is Ranger Fitzgerald at the Dawson campsite. Coordinates 48-5047 north, 121.0736 west, elevation 5,420 feet. He waited for the squelch of acknowledgement before continuing. I've got the tent. Something's wrong with it. Ice formation, but it's not cold enough for... Static burst through his Motorola, sharp and sudden. Then silence. Robert tried again. Dispatch, do you copy? Nothing. He checked the radio display. Full battery, strong signal indicator. The device should be working perfectly. He'd replaced the batteries that morning at the Marble Mount Ranger Station before driving up to the Cascade Pass trailhead. He returned his attention to the tent. The zipper was sealed shut with ice. The metal teeth fused together. Through the translucent nylon, he could make out shapes inside. A sleeping bag, a backpack, what looked like a camping stove. No body. The missing persons report had been filed 3 days ago when Tyler Dawson failed to check in with his hiking partner after a solo overnight trip. 24 years old, experienced backpacker, carrying a Garmin GPS and emergency beacon. Neither device had been activated. Robert walked the perimeter of the site, his boots crunching through patches of early snow that had fallen 2 nights prior. The campsite occupied a small clearing 50 yards off the Cascade Pass Trail, sheltered by ancient Douglas firs and western hemlocks. Standard backcountry site. Nothing remarkable about the location, but the snow told a story that made his scalp prickle. Footprints led away from the tent in every direction, dozens of them, maybe more. They radiated outward like spokes on a wheel, each track pressed deep into the thin snow cover. Robert knelt beside the nearest set, boot prints size 10 or 11, consistent with the description in the missing person report. Tyler Dawson wore size 11 Merrell hiking boots, but the prints were wrong. They started normally enough. Standard walking gait, even spacing, normal depth. But after 6 or 7 steps, they began to change. The stride lengthened impossibly, from 24 inches to 30, then 36, then more. The depth increased too, as if the person making them had suddenly gained 100 pounds, or as if something very heavy had begun walking in Tyler Dawson's boots. Robert followed one trail for 30 yards before it simply stopped. Not at a tree or rock where someone might have turned around, but in the middle of a small open space between 2 hemlocks. The final print was pressed so deep into the frozen earth that it had cracked the soil beneath the snow. Whatever made it had been carrying tremendous weight. He photographed everything with his department-issued digital camera, documenting each detail methodically. The frozen tent, the radiating footprints, the impossible final impression. 15 years of experience had taught him to trust evidence over intuition, to maintain professional skepticism in the face of the unusual. But experience had also taught him when something was fundamentally wrong. This was wrong. Robert tried the radio again. Still nothing but dead air. His cell phone showed 0 bars, which was normal for this elevation in the North Cascades. The nearest reliable signal was back at the trailhead, 4 miles and 2,000 vertical feet below. He considered hiking back down to report, but park protocol was clear. Secure the scene, document everything, retrieve any evidence that might explain the disappearance. He needed to open that tent. The hunting knife he carried for emergency rope cutting slid easily through the frozen zipper. The blade scraped against ice crystals as he worked, sending up a fine powder that caught the sunlight like diamond dust. When he'd cut a large enough opening, he pulled back the fabric. The cold hit him like a physical blow. Not the moderate November chill of the surrounding forest, but deep Arctic cold, the kind that turned breath to ice and froze exposed skin in minutes. It poured out of the tent opening like liquid, flowing down and spreading across the ground. Robert stumbled backward, gasping. Inside the tent, everything was encased in ice. The sleeping bag had frozen into a solid block of blue nylon and downfilling. The backpack was a crystallized sculpture. The camping stove, water bottles, food bags, all locked in clear ice that sparkled with an inner light. But what stopped Robert's heart was the message. Scratched into the ice-covered floor of the tent, gouged deep with what must have been the tip of a knife or tent stake, 5 words: "It followed me from Thunder Creek." Robert knew it well, a tributary drainage that branched off from the main Cascade Pass Trail, dropping into a remote valley that saw maybe a dozen visitors a year. Dense old growth, steep terrain, prone to early snow. Tyler Dawson's itinerary, according to the missing person report, had included an overnight at Thunder Creek before moving to this site. Robert photographed the message, his hands shaking slightly. Not from cold. He'd backed away from the tent's unnatural chill, but from something else. A feeling he couldn't quite name, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. He should leave. Hike back down, get more rangers, maybe even search and rescue. This was beyond his protocol, beyond his experience. But Tyler Dawson had been missing for 3 days. If there was any chance the young man was alive somewhere in these mountains, every hour mattered. Robert made his decision. He would hike to Thunder Creek, follow the drainage, look for any sign of what Tyler Dawson had encountered. If he found nothing by dark, he'd hike out and call for backup. Standard search procedure, nothing reckless about it. He was lying to himself, and he knew it. The trail to Thunder Creek descended through ancient forest, switchbacking down the mountainside through groves of trees that had stood for 500 years or more. Robert had hiked this route countless times, leading groups, checking permits, performing routine patrols. He knew every landmark, every turn, every vista. But today the forest felt different. The birds had stopped singing. Robert noticed it after the first mile. The usual forest sounds, the chatter of gray jays, the tapping of woodpeckers, the rustle of juncos in the undergrowth, had gone silent. He paused on the trail, listening. Wind moved through the high branches with a sound like distant breathing. Something dripped in the darkness beneath the hemlocks, but no birds. In 15 years, he'd never experienced complete silence in these woods. The trail grew steeper, dropping into the Thunder Creek drainage through a series of tight switchbacks carved into the mountainside. Massive boulders, left by ancient glaciers, dotted the slopes. Moss covered everything with a thick emerald carpet that muffled his footsteps. The temperature dropped as he descended, and with it came a smell, faint at first, then growing stronger. Rot. Decay, but wrong somehow. Too sweet and sharp at the same time, like meat left in a freezer too long and then thawed. Robert stopped at a junction in the trail. The main path continued down to Thunder Creek. A smaller, unofficial trail, really just a game track, branched off to the right, following the ridgeline before dropping into a side valley. The smell was stronger to the right. He turned right. The game trail wound through dense undergrowth, barely visible beneath the season's accumulated leaves and needles. Robert had to push through salal bushes and step over fallen logs, his progress slow and loud. The smell grew stronger with each step, nauseating now. He pulled his bandana up over his nose and mouth, breathing through fabric. The trail opened into a small clearing, no more than 20 feet across. What he found there would stay with him until his last day. 7 deer carcasses arranged in a circle, each one stripped of meat with surgical precision, bones gleaming white, skulls intact but empty. No scavenger damage, no blood on the ground. The deer looked like they'd been processed in a butcher shop and then carefully positioned, their skeletons forming a perfect ring around the clearing's center. In the middle of the circle, scratched into the bare earth, a symbol. Robert had seen Native American petroglyphs in his work, studied them in training courses, learned to recognize and report archaeological sites. This was similar, but wrong. The basic structure resembled symbols from the local Salish tribes, angular lines, geometric patterns, but twisted somehow, inverted. Where traditional symbols suggested balance and harmony, this one spoke of hunger. He photographed it, his hands steady now despite the rising dread. This was evidence. This was real. Whatever Tyler Dawson had encountered, it had left physical traces. A sound echoed through the trees, low, resonant, somewhere between a moan and a whistle. It came from deeper in the valley, down where Thunder Creek ran through old growth that had never been logged. Robert stood perfectly still, listening. The sound came again, closer this time. Not wind, not animal. Something else. He should run. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, get back to the main trail, hike out while he still could. But he thought of Tyler Dawson, 24 years old, someone's son, maybe someone's brother, lost in these mountains for 3 days. If there was any chance. The sound came a third time, close enough now that Robert could hear the way it echoed off the mountains, close enough that he could feel it in his chest like a second heartbeat. He moved forward. The descent into the Thunder Creek Valley took another hour. The temperature continued to drop, well below what the elevation and season should produce. Robert's breath steamed in great white plumes. Frost formed on the bark of trees, spreading visibly, crystallizing before his eyes. The stream itself, when he finally reached it, was partially frozen despite the relatively warm November weather. He found the second campsite on a gravel bar beside the creek. One tent, orange and modern, the fly properly secured, no ice, no obvious damage. But the feeling of wrongness was overwhelming, a physical pressure that made Robert's ears pop and his vision swim at the edges. The tent was empty, sleeping bag neatly rolled, pack organized, stove assembled as if for an evening meal that was never prepared. Tyler Dawson's wallet sat on a flat rock beside the tent, open to his driver's license. His phone rested next to it, dead. The emergency beacon lay nearby, unused. But inside the tent, carved into the floor again, "Don't let it speak, don't listen." Robert backed out of the tent, his mouth dry. The air felt thick, resistant, like trying to breathe underwater. The smell of rot was overwhelming now, coming from everywhere and nowhere, saturating the valley. Movement in his peripheral vision. He spun, one hand dropping to the canister of bear spray on his belt. Nothing, just trees and shadows. But the shadows were wrong, too deep for the afternoon light, pooling under the hemlocks like spilled ink. "Tyler Dawson." His voice echoed strangely, flat and distorted. "National Park Service, if you can hear me, respond." Silence. Then, from somewhere up the valley, "Help me." The voice was wrong, too perfect, too clear, carrying over the distance without natural decay. Robert had heard enough emergency calls to know how human voices sounded in distress. Ragged, desperate, breaking. This was smooth, modulated like a recording. "Tyler, stay where you are, I'm coming to you." He moved up the valley, following the creek, his hiking boots splashing through shallow water that had frozen into geometric crystals. The trees pressed close on both sides, ancient cedars with trunks 10 feet across, their bark scarred and twisted. The afternoon light was failing fast, far faster than it should, as if the valley itself was drinking the sun. "Help me," the voice again, still ahead, still wrong. Robert climbed over a massive fallen log, his hands sinking into moss that was unnaturally cold. On the far side, he found more evidence, a trail of scattered gear, a water bottle here, a fleece jacket there, a hiking boot 20 yards further on. All of Tyler Dawson's possessions according to the equipment list in the missing person report, discarded like a snake shedding its skin. The temperature had dropped below freezing. Robert could see ice forming on the exposed skin of his hands, feel his core temperature beginning to fall despite his layers. This was impossible. It had been 47 degrees at the first campsite, barely 90 minutes ago. Weather didn't change like this, not naturally. "Help me, please." Ahead, through the trees, a figure. Robert's heart hammered against his ribs. "Tyler! Tyler Dawson!" The figure stood motionless in the dimming light, partially obscured by the massive trunks of old cedars. Human-shaped, roughly the right height and build. But something about its proportions was wrong. The limbs too long, the shoulders too narrow. "I need help." The voice came from the figure, but its mouth, if it had a mouth, didn't move. Robert unclipped his flashlight, his fingers numb and clumsy. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the figure in harsh LED white. It wore Tyler Dawson's clothes, the bright blue jacket from the missing person report, the tan hiking pants, the remaining boot. But the thing inside the clothes was not human, could never have been human. The proportions were impossible. Legs that bent wrong, arms that hung to its knees, fingers that were too long and too many. Its head was covered by Tyler's knit cap, but the shape beneath was wrong, elongated with protrusions that might have been antlers or might have been something worse. "Help me." The voice was Tyler's now, perfectly reproduced. "It's cold. I'm so cold. Please help me." Robert's training, his 15 years of experience, all of it evaporated in the face of what he was seeing. His mind couldn't process it, couldn't fit this impossible thing into any framework of understanding. He stood frozen, his flashlight beam trembling on the creature. It took a step forward. The movement was wrong, jointed in places where humans didn't have joints, flowing and jerking at the same time. The boot it wore, Tyler's boot, left a print in the frost, enormous, misshapen, pressed deep with impossible weight. "Please." Tyler's voice, but layered now with something underneath, something that rasped and whistled. "I'm hungry. So hungry. Help me." Robert ran. He crashed through the undergrowth, no longer following any trail, just trying to put distance between himself and the thing. Branches whipped his face. Roots caught his boots. He fell once, hard, his hands plunging into something wet and cold that might have been mud or might have been worse. He got up, kept running. Behind him it followed. He could hear it moving through the forest, impossibly fast, impossibly quiet. The sound of Tyler's voice called after him. "Don't go, please don't go. I need you." Robert's lungs burned. His legs screamed, but terror drove him forward, down the valley, away from the thing. He splashed through Thunder Creek, the water freezing instantly on his pants. He scrambled up a boulder field, his hands bleeding from sharp rocks he couldn't see in the failing light. A sound stopped him cold. Laughter. Not Tyler's voice anymore, but something ancient, something that had never been human. It echoed through the valley, bouncing off the mountains, coming from everywhere at once. The laughter of something that found his terror amusing, his flight entertaining. Robert pressed himself against the trunk of an ancient cedar, trying to slow his breathing, trying to think. The creature was out there, somewhere in the darkness that had fallen completely now, impossible darkness at 3 in the afternoon. His flashlight had died when he fell. His radio was dead, his phone was useless. He was alone in a valley with something that wore Tyler Dawson's clothes and mimicked his voice and hunted with intelligence. Wendigo. The word rose from some half-remembered training course, some lecture on Native American traditions and respecting sacred sites. The Salish tribes had stories about creatures that lived in the deepest forests, spirits of winter and hunger that took human form, or took human skin. Robert had listened politely, filed it away as cultural folklore, never believing. He believed now. The temperature continued to drop. Robert's fingers had lost feeling. His toes burned with the first stages of frostbite. He couldn't stay here, couldn't remain still. He had to move, had to try to reach the trailhead, had to survive. A whisper in the darkness inches from his ear. "Found you." Robert bolted again, no longer thinking, pure panic driving him. He ran blind through the forest, smashing into trees, falling over logs, his body a mass of cuts and bruises. The creature paced him, always just out of sight, its laughter following him like a curse. He broke out of the trees onto what he thought was the main trail, but nothing looked right. The path was too wide, too straight, leading upward into darkness that seemed to shimmer and shift. He followed it anyway, having no other choice, his legs barely responding to his brain's commands. The trail led to a clearing he'd never seen before, though he'd hiked every inch of this drainage over 15 years. In the center of the clearing stood a structure. Rough logs, covered in moss and ice, ancient beyond measure. Something that might have been built before European settlers ever reached these mountains. Something that belonged to the original inhabitants. And around the structure, impossible in the darkness, clear as daylight in his failing vision. Symbols, the same twisted, hungry symbols he'd found at the deer circle. But these were larger, more complex, carved into the very bedrock of the mountains. This is where it lives. Tyler's voice, coming from the forest edge. This is where it's always lived. I came here. I was curious. I went inside. Robert turned slowly. The creature stood at the tree line, partially visible in the strange non-light. It had removed Tyler's cap. What it revealed made Robert's bladder release, made his mind begin to fracture. A skull. Elongated, antlered, teeth like shards of ice, but with Tyler Dawson's eyes still in the sockets, still moving, still alive. It got inside me, Tyler's voice said, though the skull's jaw didn't move. It filled me up with hunger. It's filling you up now too. Can you feel it? The cold getting inside you? The hunger starting? Robert could feel it. God help him. He could feel it. A gnawing emptiness in his gut that had nothing to do with missing meals. a coldness in his bones that went deeper than temperature. The creature was right. It was already inside him, had been since he'd found that first frozen tent, maybe since he'd started down this trail. "Don't fight it," the creature said with Tyler's stolen voice. "It hurts less if you don't fight. I fought. Look what happened to me." It stepped fully into the clearing, and Robert saw the full horror of what Tyler Dawson had become. The body was a twisted scaffold of two long bones, covered in skin that had turned gray-white, hairless, stretched tight over angles that shouldn't exist. The creature's hands ended in claws that had once been fingers, black and sharp. It moved with a sound like breaking ice, each step cracking and creaking. "You came looking for me," it said. "That was stupid. Everyone who comes looking ends up the same way. Filled up, changed, fed to the forest." Robert's hand found the bear spray on his belt. Useless against this thing he knew, but it was something, some action he could take in the face of the impossible. He raised the canister. The creature's laughter came again, that ancient horrible sound. "That won't help. Nothing helps. This mountain is hungry. This forest is hungry. We're all hungry now." Robert sprayed anyway. The jet of capsaicin oleoresin caught the creature full in the face, or what passed for its face. It didn't react. The spray froze in midair, falling to the ground as orange snow. "Stupid," the creature said again, and lunged. Robert dove aside, his body moving on instinct despite its exhaustion. The creature's claws raked across his shoulder, cutting through his jacket, his fleece, his shirt, scoring deep into flesh. The pain was immense and absent at the same time, intense agony and absolute numbness existing simultaneously. He scrambled to his feet, running again, no longer having any sense of direction. The clearing, the structure, the creature, all of it blurred together. He was going to die here. He knew it with absolute certainty. Tyler Dawson had died here, or something worse than death had happened to him, and now it would happen to Robert too. But he wouldn't go easy. Robert's hand found his knife. He spun, slashing wildly as the creature came at him again. The blade connected with something solid, cutting into flesh that felt like frozen wood. The creature screamed, not with Tyler's voice now, but with something primal, a sound that had never come from human vocal cords. It reeled back, and in that moment Robert saw his chance. The structure in the clearing's center, if this thing had come from there, maybe that's where it was vulnerable. Maybe that's where it could be stopped. He ran for the structure, the creature right behind him, its claws scraping across his back. He hit the entrance, a low opening in the stacked logs, and squeezed through, dragging himself into darkness. Inside was ice, everything ice. The structure was hollow, a natural cavity in the rock that the logs had been built around, and every surface was covered in thick glacial ice that glowed with an internal blue light. And embedded in the ice, hundreds of them, bones. Human bones, animal bones, bones from creatures Robert couldn't identify. This was the Wendigo's lair, its feeding ground, its home for centuries. The creature followed him in, its body scraping against the logs, its breath whistling cold. "Nowhere to run now," it said with Tyler's voice, but the voice was degenerating, becoming more inhuman with each word. "Nowhere to hide, just give in, let the hunger in. It's easier than fighting." Robert's back was against the ice wall. His shoulder and back bled freely, the blood freezing before it could drip. His mind was fragmenting, unable to process what he was experiencing, unable to maintain the coherent narrative of reality. He was going to break. He was going to give in. No. Somewhere in his fracturing consciousness, a memory surfaced. Training, years ago, sitting in a conference room at the ranger station, a guest speaker, an elder from the local Salish tribe, talking about the old ways, the old stories, talking about how the Wendigo could be resisted. Fire, iron, salt, belief. Robert's lighter was in his pocket. He'd used it that morning to start the stove at the ranger station, making his morning coffee in the pre-dawn darkness. His fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled for it. The creature lunged. Robert flicked the lighter. The flame was tiny, barely more than a spark. But in this place, this frozen hell of ice and bones and ancient hunger, that tiny spark was everything. It was warmth in the cold. It was light in the darkness. It was human will against inhuman hunger. The flame touched the ice. The ice exploded, not with heat. There wasn't enough heat in the lighter's flame to melt this ancient ice, but with something else, some breaking of a pattern, some disruption of the Wendigo's power. The ice shattered in a cascading failure, chunks falling from the walls, revealing the rock behind. And as the ice fell, so did the bones, clattering to the stone floor in piles. The creature screamed. Its body began to crack and splinter, the stolen flesh falling away in chunks. Tyler Dawson's face, still wearing his living eyes, detached and fell, shattering like porcelain on the stone. The skull beneath was collapsing, the antlers turning to powder. The hunger vanished from Robert's gut. The cold retreated from his bones. The pressure on his mind, the weight that had been crushing him since he'd entered this valley, lifted. He ran, out of the structure, through the clearing, into the forest. The darkness was lifting, natural light returning as if time had rewound. He found the trail, the real trail, and followed it down, down toward Thunder Creek, toward the junction, toward safety. Behind him, the structure collapsed with a sound like breaking glass. The clearing vanished, swallowed by the forest as if it had never existed. Robert didn't look back. He reached the trailhead at sunset. Real sunset. Natural sunset. The sun going down in the west as it should. His truck sat in the parking lot exactly where he'd left it that morning. He climbed inside, started the engine, drove. He didn't remember the drive back to Marble Mount. Didn't remember pulling up to the ranger station. Didn't remember his supervisor finding him in the truck, catatonic, covered in blood and ice. He wouldn't remember much of the next 3 days in the hospital, being treated for severe lacerations, frostbite, and hypothermia. When he could finally speak coherently, he told them everything. They listened patiently, professionally. They wrote it all down in their reports. And then they put him on mandatory leave, pending psychiatric evaluation. Search and rescue went into the Thunder Creek drainage. They found Tyler Dawson's campsites, both of them. They found his gear scattered through the valley. They found the frozen tent, though by the time they reached it, it had thawed, showing no unusual characteristics. They found the clearing with the deer carcasses, though there were only 3 deer, not 7, and they'd clearly been killed by a mountain lion. They did not find Tyler Dawson. They did not find the structure. They did not find the symbols carved into stone. Robert Fitzgerald never returned to duty. He took early retirement, moved away from the North Cascades, away from Washington State entirely. He settled in Arizona, in the desert, where the temperature rarely dropped below 70, and the trees were sparse and small. But on cold nights, rare as they were, he would wake from dreams of ice and hunger, of voices calling from the darkness, of Tyler Dawson's eyes in a skull that wasn't human, and he would wonder if he'd really destroyed the Wendigo, or if he'd just wounded it, if it was still out there, waiting in the Thunder Creek Valley, wearing some new skin, calling in some new voice, waiting for the next curious hiker to enter its territory, waiting to feed. On the anniversary of Tyler Dawson's disappearance, Robert received a letter. No return address, postmarked from Marble Mount, Washington. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. The photo showed the Thunder Creek trailhead. In the foreground, clearly visible, was a figure. It wore modern hiking gear, carried a large pack, faced toward the camera. The face was obscured by shadow, but the posture, the proportions, they were wrong. And on the back of the photo, written in handwriting that might have been Tyler Dawson's, 5 words, "It's hungry again, come back." Robert burned the photograph. He burned the envelope. He scattered the ashes in the desert wind and tried to forget. But on the coldest nights he could still feel it. That gnawing emptiness in his gut. That whisper of hunger that came from something old and patient and waiting. The Wendigo had marked him in that frozen structure, had left a piece of itself inside him, and sometimes, in his darkest moments, Robert wondered if he'd really escaped at all, or if he was just another skin it was slowly learning to wear, another voice it would learn to mimic perfectly, another lure it would use to draw the next victim into the hungry darkness of Thunder Creek. The desert nights were getting colder. The hunger was getting stronger. And deep in the North Cascades, in a valley that most maps didn't show anymore, something waited. Patient, ancient, starving, always starving. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The photographs made no sense. Daniel Kowalski had set up the Bushnell Trophy Cam on the Upper Hoh River Trail 3 weeks ago, positioning it at mile marker 8.7 to document the black bear population patterns he'd been tracking since spring. The camera's specifications were clear: 8 megapixel resolution, 0.6 second trigger speed, timestamp accuracy verified against NIST atomic clock standards. He'd installed 12 of these units across Olympic National Park's eastern sections, and they'd never malfunctioned. Not once in 4 years. He spread the printed images across his desk at the Hoh Rainforest Ranger Station, arranging them in chronological order. September 17, 2011, 11:47 p.m. Empty trail, moisture beating on sword ferns. The distinctive moss-draped Sitka spruce, identifiable by the lightning scar on its trunk. September 17, 2011, 11:47 p.m. A woman standing directly center frame, pale face turned toward the camera, dark hair plastered to her skull by rain. Same timestamp. Impossible. Daniel checked the metadata again. Both files showed identical EXIF data down to the millisecond. The camera's internal processor would have needed to capture, save, reset, and capture again in literally zero time. The technology didn't exist, not in 2011, not in consumer-grade equipment. He pulled up the third image, September 17, 2011, 11:48 p.m. The woman was gone. Sword ferns undisturbed, no footprints in the mud visible in the frame's lower portion. He'd hiked that trail 2 days ago to retrieve the SD card. The ground there stayed soft year-round, holding boot impressions for weeks. He'd seen his own prints from previous maintenance visits still visible in the understory. Daniel had 3 degrees: forestry management from University of Washington, ecology from Oregon State, a master's in geographic information systems from Wisconsin-Madison. He'd built his career on observable data, reproducible results, peer-reviewed methodologies. He didn't believe in camera glitches that violated the laws of physics. He believed in finding explanations. His radio crackled. He ignored it, focusing on the woman's face. The image quality was exceptional, the camera's infrared flash eliminating shadows. She wore what looked like a hiking jacket, dark material slick with rain, but her face held his attention. The skin appeared almost luminous in the flash, eyes reflecting the infrared as pure white circles. Not the typical red-eye effect, something stranger. And her expression, not startled by the camera's flash, not curious or confused, vacant, a mannequin's stare. "Kowalski, you copying?" The radio again, Maria Rodriguez, the evening dispatcher. He thumbed the transmit button. "Go ahead. Just confirming you're still planning the Hoh Lake Patrol tomorrow. Weather Service updated the forecast. Rain moving in by noon, dropping to 38 degrees at elevation." "Copy that. I'll pack accordingly." He released the button, eyes returning to the photographs. "You okay? You sound distracted." Daniel hesitated. Maria had worked Olympic National Park dispatch for 17 years. She'd heard every variety of weird report. Tourists claiming Bigfoot sightings, hikers swearing trees moved when they weren't looking, the usual Pacific Northwest mythology that locals learned to dismiss with polite nods. He didn't want to become another data point in that file. "Fine, just reviewing camera trap data, Kowalski out." He opened his laptop, pulling up the complete image sequence from that camera. 73 photographs over 3 weeks, mostly wildlife: Roosevelt elk, black-tailed deer, a cougar on September 9th that made him immediately file a predator activity report. The woman appeared in exactly 2 frames, both with the same impossible timestamp. Daniel zoomed in on her face, enhancing the image until pixels became visible. The reflection in her eyes wasn't quite right. The camera's flash should have created a single bright point, but he could see what looked like multiple light sources, clustered and irregular. He'd seen similar effects in photographs of people with certain eye conditions, coloboma, sometimes severe cataracts, but never this precisely geometric pattern. He pulled the camera's instruction manual from his filing cabinet, checking the troubleshooting section. Timestamp errors, usually caused by dead backup battery. He'd replaced that battery during installation. Double exposures, impossible with digital cameras using this image processor. Infrared flash artifacts could cause unusual reflections but not duplicate images with identical timestamps. His phone buzzed. Text from Jennifer Matsuda, the park's wildlife biologist. Got your bear population data. Can we meet tomorrow before your patrol? Need to discuss some anomalies. Daniel typed back, Aero 800 at my station? Perfect. He returned to the photographs, pulling out a magnifying glass for closer examination. The woman's clothing showed details now. The jacket wasn't modern hiking gear. The cut looked wrong, more like a wool coat, maybe Eastern European in style. And there, barely visible at the collar, embroidery. He couldn't make out the pattern clearly, but it appeared deliberate, decorative. His mind cataloged possibilities. Lost hiker photographed by chance, timestamp error making it appear simultaneous. But that didn't explain the second image showing her gone, or the lack of footprints in subsequent frames. Photographic manipulation, someone's prank. But he'd retrieved the card himself and the Bushnell's firmware didn't allow image editing through the device interface. Daniel opened his incident report database, searching for missing persons in the Olympic National Park region over the past month. 3 reports. 2 elderly hikers found safe after overnight searches. 1 woman, Ashley Nguyen, reported missing on September 12th after failing to return from a solo day hike on the Upper Ho River Trail. Last seen at the Ho Rainforest Visitor Center, departing north on the trail system around 9 a.m. He pulled Ashley Nguyen's file. Age 26, Seattle resident. Experienced hiker with multiple wilderness permits on record. The missing person report included a photo. Asian woman, shoulder-length black hair, athletic build, last seen wearing a red North Face jacket and gray hiking pants. The woman in his trail camera photos had black hair, but the jacket appeared dark, possibly black or deep blue, not red, and the facial features. He couldn't tell from the pale, washed-out quality of the infrared image. Daniel grabbed his radio. Dispatch, Kowalski. Maria responded immediately. Go ahead. The Ashley Nguyen case from September 12th. What's the current status? A pause. Search was suspended on the 20th. SAR teams covered 40 square miles over 8 days. No evidence found, no gear, no tracks, no clothing. Park Service officially classified it as presumed fatal, body unrecovered. Why? I may have camera trap footage from the Upper Ho Trail. Need to verify a timeline. Jesus, Daniel. You think you got her on film? Maybe. I need to review more carefully. Can you pull the complete SAR report and email it to me? Sending now. Listen, if you've got evidence in that case, you need to call Detective Morrison at the state police. He was the lead investigator. I will, after I'm certain what I have. Daniel hung up and opened the email. The search and rescue report ran 47 pages. Ashley Nguyen had signed the trail register at the visitor center at 9:14 a.m. on September 12th, indicating her planned route. Upper Ho River Trail to Ho Lake, approximately 18 miles round trip with 3,500 feet elevation gain. Expected return by 7 p.m. When she failed to check out by 10 p.m., park rangers initiated a preliminary search. By dawn on September 13th, a full SAR operation deployed. The search radius eventually encompassed the entire Upper Ho watershed. Helicopters with thermal imaging, ground teams with cadaver dogs, technical rescue specialists checking every ravine and cliff face. Nothing. It was as if Ashley Nguyen had simply dissolved into the temperate rainforest. Daniel cross-referenced the timeline. His camera at mile marker 8.7 would have been on Ashley's route if she'd continued past Ho Lake. But the photograph was dated September 17th, 5 days after she disappeared. That didn't align unless she'd survived those 5 days in the wilderness. Possible but unlikely given the lack of camping equipment in her daypack inventory. He examined the woman's face again, comparing it to Ashley Nguyen's driver's license photo. The infrared flash made comparison difficult, but the facial structure seemed similar. Oval face, delicate chin, high cheekbones. Could be her, could be someone else. Daniel printed both images, the trail camera photo and Ashley's license, and laid them side by side. If this was Ashley Nguyen, photographed 5 days after disappearing, 2 questions demanded answers. Where had she been for those 5 days? And why hadn't she sought help at any of the ranger stations or trail systems in the area? He pulled a topographic map from his wall rack, spreading it across the desk. The Upper Ho River Trail ran northwest from the visitor center, climbing through old-growth rainforest into alpine terrain. At mile marker 8.7, where his camera was positioned, the trail elevation sat at 2,140 feet, surrounded by dense western hemlock and Douglas fir. The nearest ranger station was his own, 8 miles southeast. The nearest road access was the Ho Rainforest parking area, 12 miles by trail. If someone wanted to hide in this terrain, they could. The Olympic wilderness contained some of the most impenetrable temperate rainforest in North America. Vegetation grew so thick in places that you could stand 15 feet from another person and never see them. The moss layer alone reached 3 feet deep in some areas, muffling sound, obscuring landmarks. People had walked past search teams before, disoriented and lost, unable to hear rescuers calling from yards away. But Ashley Nguyen was an experienced hiker. Her permit history showed multiple solo trips into Olympic, North Cascades, Mount Rainier. She carried appropriate navigation tools, GPS unit, compass, maps. Unless she'd been injured, she would have known how to self-rescue. Daniel's eyes drifted back to the trail camera photo. The woman's posture bothered him. She stood perfectly still, facing the camera directly, as if she'd known its exact location. Trail cameras were deliberately camouflaged, strapped to trees at chest height, designed to be invisible to wildlife and humans alike. Yet she stared straight into the lens. His phone buzzed again. Jennifer Matsuda. Actually, can we meet tonight? Something urgent came up with the bear data. I'm still at the office. Daniel glanced at his watch. 8:47 p.m. Jennifer usually left by 6. On my way. He gathered the photographs, sliding them into a manila folder, and grabbed his jacket. The rain had started, the sound building on the station's metal roof like radio static, that constant white noise that defined autumn in Olympic National Park. Jennifer's office was located in the main administrative building, a quarter-mile walk through darkness. Daniel followed the gravel path, his flashlight cutting through rain that fell in sheets, the kind of precipitation that soaked through supposedly waterproof gear within minutes. The forest pressed close on both sides, Sitka spruce and western red cedar towering invisible above the flashlight's reach. He found Jennifer at her desk, surrounded by printed spreadsheets and topographic overlays. She looked up as he entered, her expression strained. Thanks for coming. I know it's late. Daniel shook water from his jacket. You said urgent. Jennifer gestured to her computer screen, where a scatter plot showed data points marked in red and blue. These are bare GPS collar pings from the past 30 days. Blue points are normal range behavior, denning preparation, hyperphagia feeding patterns, typical territorial movement. Red points are anomalous. Daniel leaned closer. The red points clustered in one area, approximately 3 miles northwest of his camera trap location. What makes them anomalous? They're all nocturnal, for one thing. Black bears are crepuscular, most active at dawn and dusk, but these pings show multiple individuals congregating at this location between midnight and 4 a.m., repeatedly, for the past 2 weeks. That's not normal bear behavior. Food source? Carrion? I hiked up there yesterday, there's nothing. No dead elk, no salmon run, no berry concentrations. Just old-growth forest and a small clearing with some exposed rock formations. Jennifer pulled up a photograph on her screen. I took this while I was there. The image showed a clearing perhaps 30 feet in diameter, surrounded by massive Douglas firs. In the center, a jumble of moss-covered boulders formed what almost looked like a deliberate arrangement, a rough circle with a flat stone in the middle. European settlers called these fairy rings, Jennifer said, natural rock formations that indigenous peoples sometimes used for ceremonies. There are a few scattered throughout Olympic. But here's what's strange. She zoomed in on the flat central stone. Someone's been using this recently. Daniel could see what she meant. The stone's surface showed scraping marks, areas where the moss had been deliberately cleared away. And there, barely visible in the photograph, dark stains. Could be anything, Daniel said. Hikers having a campfire, someone's wilderness ritual. Could be, except the bears are avoiding this area now. As of 3 days ago, every GPS collar that was pinging near this location has moved at least 2 miles away. Bears don't abandon good territory without reason, especially not right before denning season. Daniel pulled the manila folder from inside his jacket. I need to show you something. He spread the trail camera photographs on Jennifer's desk, explaining the timestamp impossibility, the connection to Ashley Nguyen's disappearance. Jennifer studied the images in silence, her expression growing more troubled. This is the same general area, she finally said. Your camera at 8.7, my clearing at approximately 11.2. 3 miles, maybe 3.5. She looked up at Daniel. You think Ashley Nguyen is still alive out there? I don't know what to think. But if someone's been in that area for weeks performing some kind of ritual that's affecting wildlife behavior, and my camera caught them on film 5 days after they supposedly disappeared, you need to call the state police. And tell them what? That I have 2 photographs with impossible timestamps and a theory about fairy rings affecting bear behavior? They suspended the search. They classified her as presumed dead. Jennifer turned back to her computer, pulling up a calendar. September 17th. That's when your camera caught this image. She clicked through screens. The bears started congregating at the clearing on September 11th, 1 day before Ashley Nguyen disappeared. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked with a sound like a gunshot. There's something else, Jennifer said quietly. When I was at that clearing yesterday, I found... She hesitated. This is going to sound crazy. Try me. I found teeth marks on one of the trees. High up, maybe 7 feet off the ground, human teeth marks. Daniel stared at her. You're certain? I've been analyzing wildlife feeding behavior for 11 years. I know what bear teeth look like, what cougar teeth look like, what rodent gnawing patterns look like. These were human incisors, molars, unmistakable. Someone had bitten into the bark hard enough to leave impressions. People do strange things in the wilderness. Vision quests, survival challenges. The bite radius was too wide. I measured it. 6 inches from canine to canine. Human jaws don't open that far. They sat in silence, listening to the rain. Daniel's scientific training fought against the implications. Anomalous data required investigation, not speculation. But the pattern emerging from disconnected facts, Ashley Nguyen's disappearance, the trail camera's impossible photographs, the bear's avoidance behavior, human teeth marks with impossible dimensions, pointed towards something that his training couldn't categorize. I'm hiking up to that clearing tomorrow, Daniel said. During my Ho Lake patrol, I want to see it myself. I'm coming with you. You don't? Yes, I do. If there's someone out there, someone who's been surviving for 3 weeks in the wilderness without rescue, exhibiting bizarre behavior that's affecting the entire ecosystem, we need to find them, and we need to do it safely, which means not going alone. Daniel couldn't argue with her logic. 0700 departure. Bring climbing gear. Those rock formations look technical. Jennifer nodded. I'll file our route plan with dispatch. Daniel gathered the photographs, sliding them back into the folder. As he reached the door, Jennifer called out, Daniel, when I was at that clearing, I had this overwhelming feeling that I was being watched, and not by bears. He turned back. But you didn't see anyone? No. But I could feel it. Like eyes on the back of my neck, constant from multiple directions. I've worked in wilderness areas my entire career. I've been stalked by cougars, bluff-charged by elk, cornered by protective sows with cubs. This felt different. This felt, she struggled for the word, malicious. Daniel walked back to his station through rain that had become a deluge, his flashlight barely penetrating the darkness. The trail camera photographs felt heavy in his jacket, as if the images themselves carried weight beyond paper and ink. Inside his office, he spread the photos one more time, using his magnifying glass to examine every pixel. The woman's clothing, her posture, her impossible appearance and disappearance, and there, in the photograph's bottom corner, something he hadn't noticed before. In the mud just visible at the frame's edge, a footprint, not human, something with 3 distinct toes, each ending in what looked like a curved talon. The print was partially obscured by vegetation, but Daniel could make out enough detail to know he'd never seen anything like it in 4 years of documenting Olympics wildlife. He photographed the anomaly with his phone's camera, zooming in as close as the resolution allowed. Then he opened his laptop and began searching through every wildlife database he could access. Black bear, grizzly bear, cougar, wolverine, even the extinct species that had once roamed the Pacific Northwest, dire wolves, short-faced bears, ground sloths. Nothing matched. At 2:37 a.m., exhausted and no closer to answers, Daniel finally closed his laptop. He lay on the station's bunk, listening to rain assault the roof, and tried to sleep. But his mind kept returning to Jennifer's description. Malicious. Not defensive, not territorial, not the neutral indifference of a predator evaluating prey. Malicious implied intent, implied intelligence, implied something that wanted to harm not for survival, but for pleasure. Daniel had never believed in such things. He'd spent his career categorizing, measuring, understanding the natural world through observation and data. The Olympic wilderness was vast and dangerous, capable of killing the unprepared through exposure, injury, dehydration, 1,000 environmental hazards. But it was indifferent, not malicious. Nature didn't hate. Nature simply was. Yet as he lay in darkness, listening to the rain and the wind moving through trees that had stood for centuries before his birth, Daniel felt something he'd never experienced in all his years as a ranger. Not fear exactly, but a sense of wrongness, as if the forest itself had noticed him noticing it and didn't appreciate the attention. He thought about Ashley Nguyen, standing on that trail at 11:47 p.m. in the rain, staring into a camera she shouldn't have known was there. He thought about her empty eyes, reflecting light in geometrically impossible patterns. He thought about teeth marks 7 feet high on a tree trunk, with a bite radius no human jaw could achieve. And he thought about the old stories, the ones dismissed as superstition, that immigrants from dozens of cultures had brought to America and found echoed in the indigenous mythology already present. Stories of things that lived in deep forests, things that had once been human but had changed, had become something else, something that wore human shape but served inhuman hungers. His grandmother had told him such stories, late at night when he visited her in Tacoma during his childhood summers. She'd emigrated from Romania in 1952, carrying with her the folklore of the Carpathian Mountains, stories of Strigoi, the undead that rose from improper burials, that drained life from the living, that could appear in multiple places simultaneously because they existed partially outside linear time. Daniel had smiled at those stories, the way children smile at fairy tales, knowing they're fantasies designed to frighten and entertain. He'd grown up, gotten educated, learned to trust evidence and measurement. But as sleep finally claimed him in those early hours before dawn, his last conscious thought was a fragment of his grandmother's warning, spoken in Romanian accented English. The Strigoi knows when you speak its name, it hears across any distance, and once it knows you know, it comes looking. Daniel's alarm went off at 6:00 a.m. He woke feeling unrested, his dreams filled with images of cameras clicking in darkness, capturing frames of movement too fast to parse. He showered, dressed in layers appropriate for alpine hiking, and packed his gear: GPS unit, first aid kit, emergency shelter, 3 liters of water, high-calorie food, climbing harness, rope, carabiners. His service weapon, the Glock 22 that park regulations required him to carry, felt heavier than usual on his hip. Jennifer arrived at 6:55 similarly equipped. Her face showed the same exhaustion Daniel felt. "Didn't sleep well?" he asked. "Kept thinking about that clearing, about what we might find." She paused. "I called Detective Morrison last night. Told him about your trail camera photos." "What did he say?" "He's driving out from Port Angeles today. Should arrive around 3 p.m. I told him we'd be back by then." Jennifer hefted her pack. "If we're not back by 5, he said he's sending a search team." They set out at 7:14 a.m., taking the Upper Hoh River Trail northwest from the ranger station. The rain had stopped, but the forest dripped with retained moisture, every surface slick and treacherous. Fog moved between the trees in layers, reducing visibility to 50 feet in places, then clearing unexpectedly to reveal vistas of ancient growth: Douglas firs 6 feet in diameter, Sitka spruce rising 200 feet into mist, the understory so thick with sword ferns and salal that the ground itself became invisible beneath green. They hiked in silence, maintaining the steady pace of experienced wilderness travelers. At mile marker 8.7, Daniel stopped to check his trail camera. The unit appeared undisturbed, still strapped securely to its tree, lens unfogged. He retrieved the SD card, replacing it with a fresh one, and slipped the data into his jacket pocket. "Notice anything about the birds?" Jennifer asked. Daniel listened. The usual dawn chorus, varied thrushes, winter wrens, Pacific slope flycatchers, was absent. Complete silence except for water dripping from branches. "Could be the fog," he offered, not believing it. They continued northwest, climbing through elevation zones marked by changes in vegetation. Western hemlock gave way to silver fir, the understory thinning as altitude increased. At 3,400 feet, they reached the junction where a spur trail led to Jennifer's clearing. The path was overgrown, barely visible, marked only by old blazes on trees. Jennifer led, using her GPS to navigate. The trail climbed steeply, switchbacking through rock formations that became more pronounced as they ascended. Then abruptly, they emerged into the clearing. It was exactly as Jennifer's photograph had shown, but the atmosphere was wrong. Daniel felt it immediately. That sense of wrongness he'd experienced the night before, amplified. The air felt thicker here, harder to breathe despite the elevation. And the silence was absolute. No insects, no birds, no rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth. The rock formation dominated the clearing center. 7 moss-covered boulders arranged in a near-perfect circle, with an 8th flat stone in the middle. The rocks were granite, out of place geologically, glacial erratics, probably, deposited here during the last ice age. But their arrangement suggested human placement, deliberate design. Daniel approached the central stone. The surface had been scraped clean of moss in several places, revealing pale granite beneath, and the stains Jennifer had photographed were clearly visible now, dark brown, almost black, covering perhaps 2 square feet of stone. He pulled a sample collection kit from his pack and scraped a small amount of the stained material into a sterile vial. Blood, almost certainly. Old enough to have oxidized, but recent enough to remain tacky. Jennifer was examining the trees surrounding the clearing, her field notebook open. "Daniel, come look at this." She'd found the tree with the teeth marks. The bark had been stripped away in a rough oval pattern approximately 7 feet above ground level. Beneath the bark, the sapwood showed deep parallel grooves, incisors, 4 distinct marks, each nearly an inch wide. And there, at the pattern's edges, molars, with cusps far too pronounced for human teeth. Daniel touched the marks, feeling their depth. Whatever had made these impressions possessed tremendous jaw strength. He took photographs from multiple angles, including a ruler for scale. "There are more," Jennifer called from across the clearing. Daniel followed her pointing finger. 3 more trees showed similar damage, all at the same height, all following the same pattern. And on one tree, something else. Scratches in the bark, 4 parallel grooves running vertically for 18 inches. Claw marks. But the spacing was wrong for bear claws, wrong for cougar, wrong for any animal Daniel had ever documented. The groove pattern suggested fingers, 4 digits including a thumb, but with nails or talons far longer than human anatomy allowed. "We need to map this entire area," Daniel said. "Document everything before we disturb any evidence." They spent the next hour photographing, measuring, collecting samples. Daniel sketched the clearing's layout in his field notebook, marking each anomaly. The arrangement of stones, the trees with damage, the areas where the moss had been disturbed. Jennifer deployed her digital camera, capturing wide-angle shots and detailed close-ups. It was during this documentation process that Daniel noticed the patterns in the moss. From ground level, the clearing appeared random, chaotic, but when he climbed onto one of the larger boulders to get an elevated view, he could see deliberate arrangements. The moss had been cleared away in specific lines, forming what looked like symbols or letters. Not English, not any alphabet Daniel recognized. The characters were angular, geometric, reminiscent of runes but more complex. He called Jennifer over and they both stared at the patterns from the elevated vantage point. "This is a ritual site," Jennifer said quietly. "Someone's been conducting ceremonies here. Or something." They heard the sound simultaneously, a branch breaking, sharp and clear, from the forest to their east. Then silence again, profound and waiting. Daniel's hand moved instinctively to his service weapon. "Hello?" he called. "This is Park Ranger Daniel Kowalski. If you need assistance, please identify yourself." No response. Just that oppressive silence, as if the forest itself held its breath. Jennifer had her radio out. "Should I call for backup?" Daniel considered. They were 3 miles from the nearest road, at least 2 hours from any support. And reporting what exactly? Anomalous teeth marks and a feeling of being watched? "Not yet. Let's finish documenting, then get back to the station. We can review everything with Detective Morrison." But as he said it, he felt the sensation Jennifer had described, eyes watching from multiple directions, patient and malicious. He scanned the tree line, looking for movement, for any sign of human or animal presence. Nothing. Just Douglas firs and western hemlocks standing in fog, their trunks dark with moisture, their branches disappearing into white above. They worked quickly after that, completing their documentation in 20 minutes rather than the hour Daniel had planned. The sensation of being observed intensified, becoming almost physical, a pressure against his skin, raising the hair on his arms despite his jacket's layers. As they prepared to leave, Daniel took one final photograph of the central stone. Through his camera's viewfinder, he noticed something he'd missed during direct observation. A small object wedged beneath the stone's edge, partially hidden by moss. He knelt and carefully extracted it. A necklace, thin chain and a pendant. The pendant was tarnished silver, depicting what looked like a cross but with additions, extra bars, decorative elements Daniel didn't recognize. Eastern European, possibly Orthodox Christian. He turned it over. On the reverse, an inscription in small letters, A.N. Se te proteges Dumnezeu. Ashley Nguyen. The initials matched, but the inscription was Romanian. May God protect you. Daniel held the pendant up for Jennifer to see. Her face went pale. That was hers, Ashley's. Her mother gave it to her. It was mentioned in the missing person report. Family heirloom, Romanian ancestry on her father's side. Why would she leave it here? She wouldn't. Ashley was Orthodox. She never took that necklace off, according to her family. She wore it on every hike, every trip. Daniel slipped the necklace into an evidence bag. Then someone took it from her, someone who brought her here. They left the clearing quickly, retracing their route down the overgrown spur trail. Daniel kept checking behind them, unable to shake the feeling of pursuit. But the forest remained empty, fog-shrouded, silent. They reached the main trail at 11:15 a.m. Jennifer's GPS showed they'd covered the distance in half their usual time, adrenaline overriding fatigue. They continued southeast toward the ranger station, moving fast. At mile marker 9.3, Daniel stopped abruptly. There, in the mud beside the trail, a fresh footprint. Not human. 3 toes, curved talons, exactly matching the partial print he'd seen in his trail camera photograph. And there, 20 feet ahead, another print. Then another. A trail of prints leading southeast parallel to the path they needed to take. "Those weren't there on our way up," Jennifer whispered. Daniel checked his watch. They'd passed this exact spot at 8:47 a.m. less than 3 hours ago. The prints were fresh enough that water was still seeping into them from the saturated ground. "Something's following our route back." They heard it then, a sound from ahead from the direction of the footprints. Not quite human, not quite animal. Something between a growl and a vocalization. Words that might have been language but weren't. Syllables that hurt to hear, that made Daniel's teeth ache in his jaw. Jennifer grabbed his arm. "We need to go. Now." But as Daniel turned to look behind them, he saw movement in the fog. A shape, human-sized, pale against the dark trees, standing perfectly still, watching them. Then another shape to their left, and another to their right. 3 figures equidistant, forming a triangle around their position. Daniel drew his weapon, his hand steadier than he felt. "Identify yourselves. This is federal land. You're required to respond to Ranger Authority." The figures didn't move, but Daniel could see them more clearly now as the fog shifted. They wore clothing, hiking jackets, jeans, boots, but something was wrong with their proportions. Arms too long, torsos too thin, heads held at angles that didn't match human skeletal structure, and their faces. He couldn't quite see their faces, the fog obscured details, but what he could see suggested emptiness. Hollow eyes, skin that appeared translucent, showing darkness beneath. "Maria," Jennifer said into her radio, her voice remarkably calm. "This is Matsuda. We need immediate assistance at mile marker 9.3, Upper Ho River Trail. Multiple individuals demonstrating threatening behavior, requesting law enforcement support." Static answered her, then cutting through the white noise, a voice. Not Maria's voice. A woman's voice speaking words that weren't English, weren't any language Daniel recognized. The syllables echoed wrong, as if coming from multiple directions simultaneously. The figure ahead moved then, stepping onto the trail, and Daniel saw her clearly, the woman from his trail camera photograph. Ashley Nguyen, or what had been Ashley Nguyen. She wore the same dark jacket, her hair plastered to her skull with moisture that wasn't rain. Her skin held that same luminescent quality, pale to the point of translucence, and her eyes reflected his flashlight's beam with that impossible geometry of light, dozens of points clustered where there should have been only 2. She smiled. Her teeth were wrong. Too many, too sharp, too wide for her jaw. When she opened her mouth to speak, Daniel could see something moving in her throat, something dark and writhing. "You found my blessing," she said, her voice perfectly clear now, perfectly human except for the echo. "The grandmother's gift. Do you know what it means? C'est te protéger de Dumnezeu. May God protect you." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "It didn't." Jennifer fired her bear spray, the orange stream shooting 15 feet toward Ashley's face. The spray passed through her as if she were fog, as if she weren't quite present in 3-dimensional space. She flickered, vanishing and reappearing 3 feet to the left, her smile never wavering. "Run," Daniel said. "Jennifer, run." They ran. South, off-trail, crashing through sword ferns and salal, branches whipping their faces, moss-covered logs appearing suddenly in their path. Behind them, that sound again. Words that weren't words, syllables that made Daniel's bones ache, his vision blur. He glanced back once. All 3 figures were following, moving through the forest without displacing vegetation, without making sound. They didn't run. They simply appeared closer with each moment, as if distance held no meaning for them. Jennifer fell, her ankle turning on a hidden root. Daniel pulled her up, supporting her weight, pushing forward. They burst through a wall of salal onto a game trail, old and overgrown but navigable. Daniel followed it southeast, praying it would lead toward the main trail, toward open ground, toward anywhere but deeper into fog and trees. The game trail opened suddenly onto a small clearing, and there in the center another arrangement of stones, another ritual site. They'd been herded, driven like prey into a killing ground. The three figures emerged from the tree line surrounding them. Ashley Nguyen stood directly ahead, her impossible smile widening. "You want to understand," she said. "Your scientific minds want to categorize, to measure, to explain. So I'll explain. The old families, the ones who came from the mountains, they brought their dead with them, buried them without proper rites, without salt, without prayers. And in this place, so far from home, the dead became confused. They woke in foreign soil with foreign trees above them, and they couldn't find their way to peace." She stepped closer. Daniel could smell her now. Earth and rot and something chemical, like formaldehyde. "I was one of them. My great-great-grandmother, buried in Olympic soil in 1889. Improper burial, improper rites. And when I rose, I was hungry. But not for food, for life itself, for the time that was stolen, for all the years I should have lived." Her eyes fixed on Daniel. "You're wondering about the girl, Ashley. Young, healthy, foolish enough to hike alone. I wore her like a coat for days, feeling what it was like to be alive again. But living flesh decays when we inhabit it. It rots from the inside, breaking down, becoming useless." Jennifer was praying, Daniel realized, whispering something in Spanish, words his adrenaline-flooded mind couldn't parse. "So I shed her," the thing wearing Ashley continued. "Left her skin in the forest for the beetles and crows. But I kept her shape, her voice, her memories. They're useful. They let me move among the living, searching for others. And I've found so many. The forest is full of us now, the improperly buried, the ones who woke hungry. We gather at the stones, at the places where the barrier is thin. We share what we've learned. We grow stronger." Daniel's weapon was useless, he knew that now. But he aimed it anyway, his finger tightening on the trigger. "What do you want?" "Want?" She laughed again. "We're already taking it. Life, time, flesh. This forest belongs to us now, has belonged to us for more than a century. You're just the latest to notice." The other two figures moved closer. Daniel could see their faces now, both male, both wearing hiking clothes from different eras. One appeared middle-aged, his jacket a style from the 1970s. The other younger, his gear more recent, maybe early 2000s. Both had that same translucent skin, those same impossible eyes. "Mark Henderson," the older one said, his voice hollow. "Disappeared on the Hoh River Trail in 1978. They searched for 6 weeks, never found my body." "Connor Walsh," the younger one added. 2006, solo hike, planned route, experienced backpacker. Vanished without a trace." They were converging, the triangle tightening. Daniel calculated distances, angles, possibilities. He and Jennifer could try to fight past one of them, force through the circle. But where would they run? The forest stretched for miles in every direction, and these things could appear and disappear, flicker through space like bad film edits. Jennifer grabbed his arm. "The pendant, Ashley's pendant, its protection. That's what the inscription means. The blessing." Daniel's hand went to his pocket, finding the evidence bag containing the necklace. He pulled it out, holding it toward Ashley's advancing form. She stopped. Her smile faltered, her face contorting into something that wasn't quite human geometry. "That won't help you. I already shed that skin. The blessing died with her." But Daniel noticed she wasn't coming closer. None of them were. They'd stopped at the circle's edge, maintaining their distance. Jennifer was still praying, her Spanish flowing faster now, and Daniel recognized fragments. Catholic prayers, invocations of saints, the Lord's Prayer. And the creatures were pulling back slightly, their forms flickering like corrupted video. "You're not from here," Daniel said, his mind racing through his grandmother's stories, trying to remember details. "You're Strigoi, Romanian undead. But this isn't Romanian soil. This isn't Carpathian forest. You don't belong here." Ashley's face twisted further, her jaw unhinging slightly. "We make ourselves belong. We've had 100 years to learn this ground, to mark it, to claim it. The stones, the symbols, the blood. We've woven ourselves into this place. It's ours now. Then why do you still need the ritual sites? Why the stones, the markings? If you truly belonged, if you were truly part of this forest, you wouldn't need..." He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. Ashley's expression told him he'd struck truth. The Strigoi were powerful here, yes, but not native, not natural. They were invasive, parasitic, requiring artificial anchors to maintain their presence. Daniel grabbed Jennifer's hand. "The necklace. It's blessed, Orthodox blessed. Your grandmother gave it to you. It's Romanian blessing in American soil, bridge between both places. If we can get to water, running water." "Strigoi can't cross running water," Jennifer finished understanding. "The Ho River, it's half a mile southeast." They ran again. This time Daniel held Ashley's pendant in his fist, the blessed silver burning against his palm. Behind them the three creatures shrieked. That sound of breaking glass amplified, mixed with syllables that made Daniel's nose bleed. But they weren't following. Not closely. They flickered at the edge of visibility, appearing and vanishing, but maintaining distance from the pendant's blessing. Daniel and Jennifer crashed through underbrush, Jennifer limping badly on her twisted ankle. The sound of water reached them. The Ho River, running high from recent rain. They burst from the tree line onto the rocky riverbank, the water churning white over boulders. Daniel looked back. All three creatures stood at the forest's edge, perhaps 50 feet away. Ashley in the center, the two men flanking her. Their forms were less solid now, wavering like heat distortion. "Cross the water," Ashley called. "Run to your safe places, your lit buildings, your civilized spaces. But you know now. You know what lives in the deep forest, in the places between trails. You know we're waiting. And eventually everyone who comes here alone, everyone who wanders too far, everyone who camps in the wrong clearing. They're ours," the three said in unison. Daniel and Jennifer waded into the Ho River, the water shockingly cold even through their boots. The current was strong, pushing against their legs, threatening to sweep them downstream. But they pushed forward, hand in hand, until they reached the opposite bank. They looked back. The three figures were gone, just forest and fog and the eternal sound of water moving over stone. They made it back to the ranger station at 2:47 p.m. Detective Morrison arrived 16 minutes later, a gray-haired state police investigator with 30 years of experience written in his weathered face. They told him everything, spreading their documentation across Daniel's desk. Photographs, measurements, samples, Ashley's pendant. Morrison listened without interrupting. When they finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. "The Ashley Nguyen case has been bothering me for 3 weeks," he finally said. "Because we found something. Something I couldn't put in the official report without sounding insane." He pulled a photograph from his briefcase. "This is from thermal imaging taken during the aerial search on September 14th, day 2 of the operation. The photograph showed a heat signature in dense forest, human-shaped, but the temperature reading was all wrong. 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Human body temperature should register 98 degrees. We found 3 more signatures like this over the next week," Morrison continued, "all in the same general area as your clearing, all showing the same impossible temperatures. I had the equipment recalibrated twice. The readings were accurate." Daniel looked at the pendant still lying on his desk. "What are we supposed to do? Issue warnings? Close the forest? Tell people there are Romanian undead occupying Olympic National Park?" "We document," Morrison said quietly. "We keep records. And when people go missing, when hikers disappear without explanation, we know why." He looked at both of them. There are more sites like this. I've been tracking patterns for 15 years. Clusters of disappearances around specific locations in wilderness areas across the Pacific Northwest. Olympic, North Cascades, Mount Rainier. Places where immigrants from Eastern Europe settled in the 1800s, where they buried their dead in unconsecrated ground, where proper Orthodox rites weren't performed. "You've known," Jennifer said. "You've known this whole time." "I've suspected. Now I know." Morrison gathered his materials. "I'll file a report stating that Ashley Nguyen's case remains unsolved, body unrecovered. I'll recommend that the Upper Ho River Trail remain open, and I'll make sure your documentation is archived, properly stored, for when someone else starts noticing the patterns." After Morrison left, Daniel and Jennifer sat in silence. Outside, twilight was settling over the rainforest, fog rising from the ground, turning the spaces between trees into gray uncertainty. "We can't just do nothing," Jennifer said. "We can't let people keep hiking out there not knowing." What would we tell them? That if they hike alone, if they venture off trail, if they camp in the wrong clearing, they might encounter Romanian undead? They'd laugh at us, they'd think we're crazy. Some people wouldn't laugh. Some people would understand. The ones who know their family histories, who remember the old stories. Daniel picked up Ashley's pendant, turning it over in his hands. "May God protect you." It hadn't protected Ashley Nguyen, but it had given them enough advantage to escape, to survive, to bear witness. "We'll make a resource," he decided. "A unofficial guide. We'll document every known ritual site, every cluster of disappearances, every piece of folklore that might help people protect themselves. We'll distribute it to the Romanian Orthodox communities, the Eastern European cultural centers, anyone who might understand what they're facing." "And the others?" Jennifer asked. "The hikers who have no connection to that folklore, no family traditions to warn them?" Daniel had no answer for that. He looked out at the darkening forest, thinking of all the people who would come here seeking wilderness experience, who would hike alone into areas that had been marked and claimed by things that wore human faces but served inhuman hungers. He thought about the trail cameras he'd deployed across Olympic National Park, capturing images of wildlife going about their ancient patterns. He wondered how many other impossible photographs they'd recorded, timestamps that made no sense, figures appearing and disappearing, evidence of a parallel forest that existed just slightly outside human perception. That night, Daniel sat at his computer reviewing the SD card he'd retrieved from the mile marker 8.7 camera. Most of the images showed expected wildlife: elk, deer, raccoons, the usual nocturnal traffic along the trail. Then he reached the photographs taken after he and Jennifer had visited the clearing. September 21st, 11:47 p.m. The same timestamp as before, the same impossible simultaneity. The first image showed the empty trail, familiar now. The second image, same timestamp, showed 7 figures standing shoulder to shoulder across the frame. Ashley Nguyen in the center, the 2 men flanking her, 4 others Daniel didn't recognize. All with that translucent skin, those impossible eyes. All staring directly into the camera. And in the third image, timestamp 11:48 p.m., empty trail again. But there, barely visible in the foreground, footprints. Not the 3-toed tracks. Human footprints, dozens of them, overlapping, leading from the forest onto the trail and back again. They'd been there all along, walking the same trails, passing through the same spaces, existing in parallel with the hikers and rangers and tourists who thought they understood this wilderness. Daniel created a new folder on his computer. Olympic National Park, anomalous documentation, restricted access. He uploaded all his photographs, Jennifer's bare GPS data, the measurements from the clearing, Ashley's case file. Then he began writing, documenting everything they'd experienced, every detail that might help someone else survive a similar encounter. His grandmother had been right. The Strigoi heard when you spoke their name. They knew when you knew. But knowledge could be armor if you knew how to use it. Blessed silver, running water, prayers in the old languages, salt circles, proper burial rites. all the folklore that modern rationality had dismissed as superstition. It was 3:47 a.m. when Daniel finally finished writing. He saved the document, encrypted it, and began making copies to distribute to the contacts Morrison had provided: priests, cultural preservation societies, folklorists who studied Eastern European traditions in America. As he worked, he heard a sound outside, soft tapping against the station's window. He looked up. Ashley Nguyen stood outside in the darkness, her face pressed against the glass. Behind her, the two men. Behind them, others, perhaps a dozen figures, all with that same luminescent skin, those same hollow eyes. Ashley smiled. "You survived," she said, her voice muffled by the glass but perfectly clear. "You documented. You'll warn others. But Daniel..." She traced a symbol on the foggy window, a shape Daniel didn't recognize, angular and disturbing. "We have time. We have eternity. And this forest is so very large. How many warnings can you give? How many people will actually listen? How many will hike alone, wander off trail, camp in the wrong places?" "As many as need to hear it," Daniel said, meeting her impossible eyes. She laughed, that sound of breaking glass, and then she and the others simply vanished. Not walking away, not fading gradually. Just gone, as if they'd never been there. Daniel returned to his work, knowing he'd never sleep soundly in the Olympic wilderness again. Knowing that every time he checked his trail cameras, he'd be looking for those impossible timestamps, those figures standing where nothing should exist. But also knowing that he'd survived, that Jennifer had survived, that some knowledge was worth the cost of never feeling safe again. Outside, the rain returned, drumming steadily against the roof, and in the darkness between trees, invisible to human eyes but present nonetheless, the Strigoi of Olympic National Park continued their eternal watch, waiting for the next hiker who wandered too far, the next soul who couldn't find their way back to safety. The forest was vast. The forest was patient. And the forest, Daniel now understood, was far more crowded than anyone realized. 3 months later, in December 2011, Daniel received a call from a Romanian Orthodox priest in Seattle. Father Nicolae had received Daniel's documentation and wanted to discuss performing cleansing rituals at the identified sites. They met at a coffee shop in Port Angeles, and the priest brought a wooden box containing items that looked medieval: silver crosses, vessels of holy water, ancient prayer books with pages yellow with age. "My grandfather told me stories," Father Nicolae said, "about the ones who came here in the 1880s, fleeing poverty and persecution. Many died during the journey. Many died shortly after arrival, in logging accidents, from exposure, from diseases they had no immunity against. They were buried hastily, without proper Orthodox rites, in ground that wasn't consecrated. And when Strigoi rise from improper burial, they carry their hunger across generations." "Can you stop them?" Daniel asked. "Can the rituals actually destroy them?" Father Nicolae's expression was grave. "Not destroy, but we can sever their connection to this place, force them to move on to proper judgment. It requires blessing the sites, reconsecrating the ground, performing the rites that should have been done in 1889. But Daniel..." He leaned forward. "We can only cleanse sites we know about. Your documentation shows 7 confirmed locations, but Olympic National Park covers nearly 1 million acres. How many other sites exist? How many other clusters of Strigoi have we not yet discovered?" Daniel had no answer. He'd spent the past 3 months expanding his trail camera network, documenting more anomalies, finding more impossible timestamps. The forest was indeed crowded, and not just with Strigoi. "There's something else," Daniel said. "Other entities. Indigenous spirits that were here long before European immigrants arrived. And they're aware of the Strigoi. They're responding." He showed Father Nicolae photographs taken by a camera near Ho Lake. The images showed what appeared to be Native American figures in traditional dress, but they were translucent, flickering like the Strigoi, standing in a circle around one of the ritual sites, not participating in the rituals, protecting the forest from them. "The land has its own defenders," Father Nikolai said quietly. Indigenous peoples buried their dead properly, with respect, with ceremonies that maintained balance. Their spirits don't become strigoi, they become guardians. So we have two layers of supernatural presence. The strigoi, invasive and parasitic, and the indigenous spirits, defending their territory, and humans caught between them, not understanding either. Father Nikolai nodded. Welcome to the real wilderness, Ranger Kowalski, the one that existed here long before your maps and trail markers, and will exist long after. The question is, what do we do about it? They worked together over the following months, performing orthodox cleansing rituals at the 7 identified sites. Father Nikolai brought others, priests from Tacoma, Portland, even one from Vancouver, and they recited prayers in Romanian and Old Church Slavonic, blessed the ground with holy water, performed rites that dated back to medieval Carpathia. At each site, Daniel documented the process with trail cameras. The footage showed the strigoi gathering as the priests worked, dozens of figures surrounding the clearings, watching with those hollow eyes. But they couldn't approach. The blessed ground repelled them, forcing them back into the deep forest. And at each site, after the cleansing was complete, the indigenous spirits appeared, just for moments, flickering at the edge of visibility. Daniel thought he recognized gratitude in their brief manifestations, as if they approved of the work, of the Europeans finally cleaning up their supernatural pollution. But it was a temporary solution at best. New hikers disappeared every season. New reports of impossible encounters filtered through Park Service channels, most dismissed as hallucinations or substance-induced delusions. Daniel and Jennifer continued documenting, continued maintaining their archive of anomalous data. And every time Daniel checked his trail cameras, he found new photographs, new figures with translucent skin and impossible eyes, new 3-toed footprints in the mud, new evidence of the parallel forest that existed alongside the one tourists photographed and celebrated. The Olympic National Park brochure described it as pristine wilderness showcasing the best of Pacific Northwest ecology. And it was true, from a certain perspective. The trees were ancient and magnificent. The wildlife was abundant and diverse. The vistas were breathtaking, but Daniel knew the truth. Knew what waited in the clearings between trails in the hours after midnight, in the places where fog rendered the world uncertain. He knew that wilderness had layers, that some ecosystems existed outside human taxonomies, that forests could be crowded with presences that made no sound and left no tracks until they wanted to be found. He kept working, kept documenting, kept trying to protect those few people who would listen to warnings about things that shouldn't exist but did, because the alternative was letting the forest keep its secrets. And Daniel had seen what happened to people who wandered into those secrets unprepared, had seen their faces photographed by trail cameras weeks after they disappeared, staring into lenses with eyes that reflected light in impossible patterns. The forest was patient. The forest was vast. And the forest, Daniel understood now, would never truly be mapped or cataloged or understood by human minds. Some wilderness resisted comprehension. Some darkness couldn't be illuminated. But he could at least stand at the boundary between knowing and not knowing, and offer warnings to those who might listen. It wasn't much, but it was something. On a cold January morning in 2012, Daniel stood at the Upper Hoh River Trail trailhead, watching a young woman sign the trail register. She was heading out alone for a 3-day backpacking trip, destination Hoh Lake and beyond. "Excuse me," Daniel said, approaching carefully. "Do you have a minute?" The woman looked up, suspicious but polite. "Is there a problem with my permit?" "No, nothing like that. I just wanted to give you some information about the area you'll be hiking through." He handed her a printed pamphlet, unofficial, not Park Service material, but carefully researched. There are some cultural considerations, things that previous hikers have reported. Just read it when you have time. The woman took the pamphlet, glancing at the title, Wilderness Safety, Cultural and Historical Awareness for Olympic National Park Backcountry. "Is this like a Bigfoot thing?" she asked, smiling slightly. "Not exactly, just please read it." And if you see anything unusual, anything that doesn't feel right, trust your instincts. Get back to maintained trails, get to running water. Don't camp in clearings with circular rock formations. The woman's smile faded as she looked at his expression. You're serious? Completely. She nodded slowly, tucking the pamphlet into her jacket pocket. Okay, thanks, I guess. Daniel watched her hike away up the trail, her figure growing smaller until fog swallowed her completely. He didn't know if she'd read the pamphlet, didn't know if she'd take the warning seriously, didn't know if she'd encounter anything that would make the information relevant. But he'd tried. That was all anyone could do. He returned to his station, where new trail camera data waited for review, where Jennifer had left a note about fresh bear GPS anomalies, where his computer held thousands of photographs of a forest that was far stranger and more dangerous than anyone wanted to admit. And somewhere in the deep wilderness, in clearings marked with symbols that predated American settlement, the Strigoi of Olympic National Park waited with infinite patience for the next wanderer, the next soul, the next life to claim as their own. The forest was vast, the forest was patient, and the forest, Daniel knew with absolute certainty, would never be truly safe. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened.